This is the Lifestyle Builders Podcast, show 93, The FIRE Movement, Financial Independence, Retire with Entrepreneurship. Are you frustrated by a lack of momentum in your business? Tired of putting in long hours doing what everyone says you should and still not making money? Sounds like you're ready for Lifestyle Builders. We'll help you get back on track, taking action, and seeing results. Head over to joinlifestylebuilders.com today to get started.
Oh, you did a little change up on the title there.
I changed it up a little bit. That's not actually what the R and the E stands for.
So traditionally, FIRE is financial independence, retire early.
It is. We've put a little bit of a little switcheroo on our version of FIRE.
Yeah, and we'll get into this a little bit more in the episode, but this is a pretty cool movement. I think you guys are going to really enjoy this episode.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are getting behind the FIRE movement.
Yeah. Well, and it's really getting outside of that like traditional kind of path of, what we talk about with, go to high school, get good grades, go to college, get good grades, work a job for like 45 years, and then hopefully you retire.
It's a nice go along with entrepreneurship too, because it's, again, entrepreneurship is not the traditional path. So this is like a mutually beneficial path.
Well, and that's where I like, your changes there, because what tends to happen is people like retire early, but then they often get bored and they, just aren't happy. And like I had a mentor tell me a couple years ago, like, Tom, quit saying you're going to retire because you're not. What he talked about was really having just more options. And that's really what I think this is about. But a lot of people kind of miss the options piece.
Yeah. I have a random tangent that is related to FIRE.
Okay.
It's a story about when something in our house caught on fire. And it's one of those really weird moments that your kids remember forever.
Was it when you burned the popcorn?
No, it was not when I burned the popcorn. That was really bad, by the way. First time I've ever burned popcorn in my life, I was 30. How old am I? 3. I was 33.
Yeah. And our house was just filled with black smoke.
No, but the actual fire, like we had an actual fire in our house, a candle. Got really hot and it cracked like the glass and the candle caught on fire and it was like burning. The candle was like in flames in our bedroom.
Yeah.
And our son was really little. I remember like running upstairs and I just screamed your name and you came running up the stairs and our daughter was terrified. And now to this day, it was probably like 2-3 years ago.
Oh yeah. She still brings it up.
She still brings it up.
She
Remember when
everything.
The candle caught on fire and Daddy had to use the extinguisher and the house was filled with smoke? I'm like, why do kids remember the weirdest things?
I know, she remembers everything. But the good thing with that is that they're very, in principle. So with all the things we're teaching them now, specifically around FIRE, it's going to be stuff that they remember. And we're already starting to see pieces of that, which is awesome.
Real FIRE and the acronym FIRE.
Yes.
Both FIREs. They're remembering all the things about FIRE.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about what FIRE, the acronym, is, because I'm assuming most people know what FIRE, the real FIRE is.
Correct. All right. So FIRE, the acronym, stands for, the FI is for financial independence, and the RE traditionally stands for retire early. So you may have seen some articles flowing around or heard about this thing that's happening, but it's really popular in the younger crowd, like the millennial crowd, I guess you would call us. Who knows what we really are.
I was going to say, so I never know if we're millennials or, because what was it before?
We're Gen X.
Gen X
I'm
was
pretty
before,
sure we're in the cusp of like Gen X before it became
millennials are Gen Y, right?
No, it's not the same thing.
Okay.
See? This is why we're confused. We were born in 1984. Someone please comment on this and tell us what we are.
I know. I never know. Sometimes I'm grouped into it. Sometimes we're not.
Anywho, it is a popular movement among the millennial crowd and, kids that are kind of coming up through this new space in college and coming out of college and getting into jobs and realizing that they don't really want to have jobs that they don't enjoy and they don't want to be stuck with this whole consumerism ideal of having expensive things and buying more expensive things and having to have a job that then can pay for those expensive things.
Well, like, so before it got termed like FIRE, this was a lot of what I had wanted when we were leaving college. So if you guys haven't heard the story, basically when we went to leave college, I was like, up until that point, I was on the traditional path and things were fine. And then as I started looking ahead, I'm like, man, I don't want to work for the next 45 years. And, I've mentioned the book, The Automatic Millionaire. That started to kind of change my perspective on like money. Rich Dad, Poor Dad was a big influence into that. But when I set the goal to quote unquote retire by 35, what I was really saying was what the FIRE movement is saying is that I want to achieve financial freedom or financial independence. And then at that point, the retire early part wasn't so much about traditional retirement, but it was more about having options and living the life that we wanted.
Correct. Yeah. So, I mean, this movement is really catching a lot of momentum.
Catching fire?
Ha, 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 ha. Hilarious. No, it's catching a lot of momentum in the fact that more and more young people are coming out of college. They're getting jobs, but instead of spending what they're earning, more and more of them are paying off their student loan debt. They're paying off the mortgages on their homes. They're racking up and saving half of the income that they're bringing in from, higher paying jobs, because they're looking at this as, I don't want to work this job forever. They're high stress. Maybe they live in a really expensive city. There's a lot of people that are kind of like, it's like life hacking almost, like, oh, well, how can I live in a way that doesn't require me to have a high stress, high paying job, doesn't require me to have a lot of things that cost a lot of money, and gives me more freedom.
Yeah. Well, and so what's the good and the bad was that this was kind of the mindset that I had coming out of school. You didn't have this mindset at all, which I think was part of our challenge. And then, we made a handful of mistakes that actually set us back several years with this. So, if you guys have heard some of the other episodes, I don't have the numbers offhand, we've talked about like we got into like over $200,000 worth of debt between student loans and house and cars and whatever else, credit cards, wedding. Yeah, so we ended up doing all these things that kind of set us back a couple of years in terms of, achieving FIRE ourselves. But I think most of it is just like our parents and their parents' generation was like that traditional path. And it's crazy just to see that like we're almost going back to what like grandparents had done, where it was like, let's keep things simple. Let's not get into like credit card debt. Let's only buy what we can afford. And not only that, let's actually take it to more of the extreme and be like, let's keep our costs as low as possible, because the more money that we can sock away, the more options and freedom we give ourselves later on.
Well, it's funny. I was reading some articles as I was kind of just looking into to prepare and talk about this on the episode. And there was people that they had interviewed that had achieved FIRE. They were retiring before their parents. And it was like really awkward at family gatherings and stuff.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, if you're doing FIRE, I mean, most people that are doing this tend to retire in their 20s and 30s, especially one, if you avoid college and you're not getting into debt right away. But two, even if you come out of college and you get decent jobs and you just save a lot of that money.
Even later though, too, there's a lot of people in their mid to late 30s that are realizing it and looking at how can we cut down the cost of living so that in the next 5 years, we'll work the same jobs, we'll cut our costs in half. 5 years from now, everything will be paid off, and then we have the freedom to kind of do what we want to do and where we want to do it. There are even some people that are doing, they're taking the money that they're saving and investing it into things that are going to, it's almost like the passive income movement too, where people are going to live off their investments once they retire.
Yeah, well, so the whole thing with this is that just like with any sort of retirement, like the earlier you start, the better. So, I mean, if you can start when you have no debt and when you're young, you're going to be able to achieve it faster. But even if you're later on, you can start now. And one of the first ways we have everybody we work with is basically just take a look and understand your current financial situation. And then look to where you can reduce your expenses, because the more you reduce your current expenses for a short period of time, the more space you have to then put the money away, pay off debt, and get yourself in a better financial position so that this can work for you.
Mm-hmm. And there are a couple different versions of FIRE that have been called out, just kind of different ways that people are living them. The first way is lean FIRE, which is like extreme frugalness.
Yeah, well, it takes what I just said, really, like you said, to the extreme.
Yes, like examples would be people that are selling off their house and going and buying a tiny home, or do it like we know a couple people in the van life community where they've done that.
Yeah,
they sold their house.
Matt and Allie are
they
past
bought
guests.
A van. They lived in the van for like a year and just like lived really frugally. It's almost like the minimalism. People are living on a lot less. They're buying a lot less. So that allows them to be in FIRE longer without having to have as much savings or investments coming in.
Yeah, well, I tell a story often about playing this game called Cash Flow 101. And the first time I played, I was the doctor, and I thought that I was going to win this game really quick. And what ended up happening was a janitor won the game. And I didn't understand why this happened. But ultimately, the doctor's expenses were so high that the doctor had to make a lot of money. The janitor's expenses were so low that the janitor didn't have to make nearly as much money to make it work. So that lean is really what I think most people should be doing anyways. You should be living on less than you make. A big challenge we have in the US today is that most people don't. Most people live on more than they make, which means they get into credit card debt. They finance cars for 10 years or whatever. I mean, just craziness. So we're borrowing a lot rather than not only living within our means, but what the lean FIRE does is really just take it to the extreme, where people are living on maybe 20% or 30% of their income. I think a common way is kind of 50%. That's what a lot of people target. But when you go to the lean, it's how do I keep my expenses as low as possible? And then there's other variations with this, where people might live in a place like a city or another country that is lower cost of living.
A lot of people are experimenting with moving to different countries because the cost of living is so much lower.
Yeah, you might have heard.
And then you're also getting to travel, and you might have heard the term digital nomads, where people they legit don't have a home. They just travel to all these different countries, but the cost of living is so low that they can afford to move around and live in really nice places in these other countries.
Well, we had
on less than they could live here.
Well, we had guests on the Couples and Entrepreneurship series, Carrie and Demir Bentley, where they're living in another country, and they just talked about they have someone prepare their meals and someone clean their house, and they're if we were not in this country, we probably wouldn't be able to afford all this. But because they chose where they wanted to live, they actually could.
Yep. Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways that, you can kind of live your FIRE. There's also another funny one that has been termed Barista FIRE, which is basically people who have achieved FIRE, but they go back and work at a place like Starbucks for part-time just to get benefits for themselves and their family, which, I mean, it's smart,
Well, I think some of it's benefits. And then the other thing that ends up happening too is when when so much of your life is working, and then suddenly you don't work anymore, most people don't know what to do with themselves. So we even traditional retarees, they'll retire from a job and then they'll go work a part-time job just to keep themselves busy and being around people and all of that. So Barista FIRE is definitely, and I love that term. Apparently they'll go and work at Starbucks,
apparently. Right? It's one of the few places that gives their part-time employees benefits, I guess.
Yeah. And then the other one is what? Fat FIRE?
Fat FIRE. Yeah, that one is more the typical, like you said, that 50%, where they've reduced expenses, but they're still living that kind of standard lifestyle.
So here's the thing. You can tell kind of the mindset of this movement, because when you hear the lean, which is extreme frugality, that makes sense. But then you hear just regular living and they call it Fat FIRE, So you can tell that this is really rooted in frugality and then minimalism. And I'll tell you, whenever things get complicated, or whenever you have a lot of things in your head, a lot of things around your house, it's more maintenance. It's more to worry about. And that's why I think so many people are appealing to like this minimalistic movement,
the tiny home
because it's
movement.
like, it's less to worry about. It's less to pay for. And instead of being kind of bogged down with all this stuff, you get to experience life and what you want more out of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of benefits to the FIRE movement. I mean, like the freedom is the first and biggest one. People are doing this to have the freedom to not have a job, to not be bogged down by a mortgage, to not be bogged down by car payments or student loans or things that are kind of like chaining you to a job. You're giving yourself not only the freedom of not having those things, but the freedom to kind of be able to do whatever you want.
Yeah, well, I mean, so like you guys have heard us talk about this before, but our Plan with Purpose course, we actually take people through this 2-page document we call the Life Planner. And what this is really figuring out what you want out of life, right? And it starts with things, right? Because there are things people want. Now, it might be a bigger house, but maybe it's a smaller house, right? And so that's usually the starting point that most people list when they say what do they want. But then it shifts to experiences and then relationships and then impact. And what I think you find with a lot of this FIRE movement is people shifting into valuing experiences oftentimes over things, valuing relationships and being able to spend time with people, and then impact, being able to help and do things that they truly care about. You know, I think that's just a lot more prevalent. I don't think it's that it wasn't prevalent in previous generations, but I think younger generations are now figuring that out much sooner, and it's part of like their core values.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think learning to live frugally is a benefit because
absolutely
most of us didn't really, I mean, that wasn't what was being taught in the generations when we were all growing up. It was
I think it was taught like the generations before.
Yeah, like our grandparents.
Like grandparents, yep.
Yeah. And then we got into it was like the baby boomer generation, and credit was like this big thing where no one really had access to that before. And all of a sudden everybody did everything on credit. And we didn't teach kids that, you know, credit is kind of, you're on borrowed time and you eventually are going to have to pay that off, you know, or you get to the end of your life and then your kids are going to have to pay that off because it gets passed down. So I think we're kind of moving back to let's teach kids how to live that more minimalist lifestyle, like how to be happier with less instead of more, because I mean, and I still see it a lot. You know, we get the crazy pictures around Christmas time where the parents are like posting pictures of a bajillion presents around the Christmas tree. And I think like slowly but surely this FIRE movement is trying to show people that you can do it a different way. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to be competing and trying to keep up with everybody else.
Well, you know, there's a couple things there. So one thing that I've seen, you know, not only with ourselves, but talking to a lot of people is you were talking kind of like that pendulum swinging. And so what tends to happen is like somebody grows up maybe with not a lot, and then they work really hard. They get really good core values, good work ethic, and then they do well. And they don't want their kids to struggle the same way. So they then
it's like overcompensating.
They overcompensate. But then what they do without realizing is they rob their kids of understanding how money works, you know, the value of hard work. And then their kids really don't do that. And they end up usually getting into financial trouble, getting into credit card debt, all of that. And then it kind of swings the other way because now their kids don't have a lot and they've got to work hard. So I think a big part of this is recognizing that and making sure that you're still giving your kids the lessons, even though you financially could take care of them. Like, I mean, that's been a big thing with us. Like, my sister moved into our house at one point and we charged her rent, not because we necessarily needed the money, but to make sure that she understood that this wasn't a free ride. You're going to have to pay.
We do it with our kids. We go grocery shopping every single week, and every single week they try to ask for a toy at the store. And I ask them if they brought their money. And sometimes they do. Sometimes they don't. And I say, okay, well, you're going to owe me out of your piggy banks when we get home then if you pick out a toy, because I don't want to instill that in their minds that every time we go somewhere and every time they ask for something that they just get it. They get it no matter what, whether they did the work, whether they had good or bad behavior. We want to instill in our kids that you don't always get what you want just because you want it. And sometimes if you can pay for things, sure, you can go and spend your money and buy that big fancy toy, but that's your responsibility because that's something that you want. And we're trying to teach them that, and ultimately teach them the lesson that eventually you run out of money and then you can't get the things that you want. Well, so you've got to figure out how to get more.
And they've seen that.
He has not yet. He didn't care much about it, but she's totally seen it. I want that. You got any money? No. Mm-hmm. What can I do to get some more money? Good question.
Exactly. And that's kind of going back to that imprinting. They're now starting to learn these lessons. I mean, funny story. They go around now like doing the intro to the podcast.
Yep.
Right. Like, so, and then they go around telling people,
we done to our children?
Well, so here's the thing though. They go around telling people, it's your life, your business, your way. They're starting to repeat that. That's now going to be something they're going to remember throughout their lives, and it's going to come back. Like they even requested shirts the other day. So now they wore like the Lifestyle Builder shirts with the tagline on the back to school, and other people are talking about that. So like I think what's been really cool, like being parents going through this, is that we are teaching them those lessons. Mm-hmm. And I know the pendulum isn't going to swing back, even though we maybe didn't have everything growing up, because we're now teaching them some of that.
Yeah. So we went on a slight side tangent, which is totally just fine. So how this show goes.
I was going to say, I love how you call out every side tangent, but we have side tangents every show. You call it out like it's a weird thing. It's the norm.
Because I guess I'm still assuming that we're going to stick to the topic, but I should know better.
All right. So the real side tangent is when we don't go on a side tangent. That was a side tangent on a side tangent, by the way.
Podcast inception. All right. So basically, we kind of went through all that just to give you a feel of what the FIRE movement is, what it's about, the benefits and all that. But the reason that we have changed the last two letters to be, well, not the last two, I guess the last one, retire instead of early, retire with entrepreneurship, is because we are not the type of people that are ever going to stop doing something. And I think that whole retire early thing just doesn't sit well with me because I don't want to actually retire in the sense of the word, not have to do anything. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of people that feel the same way, like, oh, retiring early sounds great, but we're 33, I'm going to be 34 in a couple days here. 34, retiring early, we've got how many years? 70 years left if we live to be 100, like my great-grandmother did. And what the heck are we going to do for 70 years? I need something to keep my brain going.
Well, so I put a post up yesterday and it seemed to resonate with a lot of people. A lot of people say, like, I want to be an entrepreneur. And to me, the goal is never about being an entrepreneur. It's about, like, what does being an entrepreneur do for you? And like for us, one of our core values is family first, then impact. And so the way I see entrepreneurship is, one, it takes care of us, but then two, it's an opportunity to help more people. Mm-hmm. So I love that change of, instead of retiring early, like we're going to retire in the traditional sense, we're going to retire and then we're going to shift more into impact because entrepreneurship allows us to now help more people. So I love that reframe. And I think, from a lot of people, I think in the FIRE movement, what I've seen is that there's not enough focus on then what.
After
right?
the retire
like it's
early,
almost like it's I'm going to target, I'm going to retire early. And then it's like, okay, well, so why? Mm-hmm. And we find a lot of people get into that funk.
It's about the challenge. I think for a lot of people, like they love the numbers and they love the challenge of we're gonna be financially independent by the age of 30 and we're gonna retire and not have to work a job. So it's like there's no movement for beyond that yet. We need to create the after FIRE movement.
And I think that's a lot of what we're doing with the Lifestyle Builders movement, right? It's like, build your lifestyle. And part of what we always talk about with like the planner is shifting from just surviving and taking care of yourself mm-hmm. to thriving and helping others, and I think that's a big part of like why, and back to that point, what a lot of people run into is they set a goal and they think that once they achieve the goal, they're going to be happy. it's rarely the case, whether it's achieving FIRE, whether it's, achieving a certain revenue or something like that. But for most people, the value and what they really appreciate is kind of that journey to get there. And I don't think most people look beyond that, that FIRE point to know what's next. And that's why, like, what we talk about with people is your freedom number. That's essentially what's going to allow you, when you've got enough coming in to cover all your expenses. But then we have a second number called the dream number. That is looking at everything on your vision board, everything you want to achieve, and saying, how much do you need to bring in to achieve that? And that's and it shouldn't be a bad thing to achieve your dream number, because part of that is not only living a great life yourself, but being able to help and impact other people and causes that matter to you.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the biggest thing that we stress with this is that everyone's freedom number and dream numbers are going to look different. And we've talked about this before on a couple episodes. I might have been one with a guest, but like the word impact is thrown around a lot right now. And I feel like it's kind of a buzzword, because when people think impact, they think it has to be on this large, grand scale, when it doesn't really. Impact means to you whatever it means. So it could be making an impact in your community. That might not take a ton of money. Maybe it takes your time. So maybe for you, achieving FIRE means that you do retire because then you want to impact others by giving your time. And there are some people that want to make an impact on a grand scale. FIRE helps you because you get to that financial independence, and then you can use all of that time that you've gotten back to go and build a business that is going to impact people on a grand scale. So I think the main point here is impact is got to be your own definition of what that means. Just like we talk about success has to be your own definition of what that means. So if you're looking at it from that sense, I think the FIRE movement is a really, really powerful thing to kind of tack on and accept into your own life, and then define what the after is for you. Define what that RE means. If it is retire early, that's awesome. Figure out what you want to do with your life after you've retired early. Maybe you want to travel the world and just make an impact on a small scale, helping people in the communities that you live in. That's great. That's awesome. But I think you got to define that. When you're saying, I'm going to do FIRE, I'm going to be financially independent, I'm going to retire early, define what the after looks like for you. Because otherwise, like Tom said, you're going to be like, okay, now what? Okay, now I'm just living off my investments on $40,000 a year, and that's just it.
Well, and this is a big reason that, we wrote the Lifestyle Builders book that'll be coming out in 2019. It's because, when we've read different books or talked to different people, they hit on pieces of this, right? Like, so it was funny. We were at the bookstore the other day, basically planning out like where our book was going to be. We actually took a picture. We'll post it up on the show notes page at tomandariana.com/93. But when we did it, it was kind of interesting, because it was like, well, first off, inspiration's over here. And then like personal finance is over here.
Personal development.
And then you've got like small business success over here. And then you've got, but like, as we looked at it, we're like, this is kind of like our book encompasses and cuts a line across all of those, because when you just have one without some of the other ones, like there's no meaning behind it. Really excited to get this out for you guys. And if you guys want to get on the wait list, get some of the early details, what we'll be putting out, you guys can go to tomandariana.com/book and jump on that wait list. Be the first to get notified.
Woohoo! All right.
I was going to say before we end, I got to give a shout out. If you guys are interested in the FIRE movement, FinCon is a phenomenal conference to go to.
Where we just came from.
Yep. And we actually had PT and his wife, Teresa, on the podcast talking about couples and entrepreneurship. But he was talking about how FinCon came about. And, we've gone the past 2 years, and it's been just a really good place for other people in this FIRE movement community talking about personal finance. So if you're interested in anything we talked about today at all, highly check out FinCon.
Yeah, and there's a FinCon Facebook group. So it's a community of all the people in the FinCon community. I just said community twice. But that is kind of where everyone hangs out. So if you're truly interested in the FIRE movement, that is the best place to be, because a lot of the people in the FinCon community blog and podcast and, do speaking, like do all sorts of things around the FIRE movement. So you can kind of dive in a little bit, see what it's all about, and then maybe find somebody that really resonates with you that's talking about it.
Absolutely.
So we'll put a link in the show notes to the FinCon community group, so that way you can check it out.
So we mentioned a ton of stuff on this episode. So I would highly recommend checking out the show notes, because we'll link to everything on the show notes page. But there's a lot of really good resources around kind of this whole movement.
There are. Yeah. All right. What are the actions for today? I know what my action is. I would love for you to come and post up either on the show notes page or on our Facebook page, Tom and Ariana. What does financial independence look like for you?
So tell us a little more. What do you want people to post?
I want you to post up, what does financial independence mean for you and for your family? So what does that look like? Does that look like paying off all of your debt? Does it look like kind of moving into that minimalist lifestyle? Maybe you've always wanted to do the tiny home thing. What does financial independence kind of mean to you? How do you define it?
Gotcha. And so my actions for you guys are going to be directly related to that. I want you guys to figure out what we call your freedom number. And essentially this is how much you need to be bringing in to cover all of your expenses. And now there's a little bit of kind of a side thing with this. Most people look at their expenses today and assume that's their freedom number. If you leave a job, there's other expenses that are going to come up, like your health insurance. So part of your freedom number is figuring out not only what your expenses are today, but when you leave your job, what your expenses will be at that point. Yeah.
All right. What's the books for today?
Okay. So we got 2 books for today. The first one is one that I read like years ago, The Millionaire Next Door, The Surprising Secrets of America's Wealth. Now, this book was one of the ones that I read early on before I knew about this FIRE movement, but I want to read these 7 factors from this book that I think are kind of the basis. So this is looking at wealthy people. What are some of the characteristics? They live well below their means. They allocate their time, energy, and money efficiently in ways conducive to building wealth. They believe that financial independence is more important than displaying high social status. Their parents did not provide economic outpatient care, which is basically coddle them. The adult children are economically self-sufficient. They are proficient, which is what we talked about with us raising our kids. They're proficient in targeting market opportunities, and they chose the right occupation. So this book is just really good because most of us, when we think about wealthy people, we think about what we see, nice cars, nice health. Mm-hmm. This really goes, this was published, 20, 30 years ago. It goes through and redefines what wealthy people actually look like. Mm-hmm. And it's usually counterintuitive to what you would expect.
It was everyone picks on, wow, I can't think of his name right now. Facebook.
Mark Zuckerberg.
Mark Zuckerberg, they pick on him because he's always wearing a t-shirt and jeans. And, he's a super wealthy guy, but he doesn't necessarily portray that with what he wears, what he carries around, what he drives in, what he kind of how he lives.
Yeah.
And I think there's certain people that you can kind of pull out because you don't see them a lot in the spotlight because they're not flashy.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of it, we'll go on a little side tangent too with this, but, a lot of times when people need or have things, it's usually because we're not completely happy or comfortable with ourselves, which is why we think we have to buy a nice car. And usually there's a lot of depression and anxiety around this because we're trying to impress other people rather than be true to ourselves. And I think what a lot of people find through here is not only financial independence, but they really start to understand what's important to them and start valuing their opinion more than opinions of other people that they don't really care about or don't really impact their life.
Yeah, they've become really clear on their own priorities.
Yep. All right, so I have a second book today, and I'm going to be honest, I haven't read this one yet.
What? A book you haven't read?
I know, it's a newer book. It's called The Simple Path to Wealth, Your Roadmap to Financial Independence and a Rich, Free Life. And I almost never recommend a book that I haven't read. But the reason I want to recommend this one is because when I went to do some research on the FIRE movement, because I would say we're like old school FIRE, like a lot of our stuff is based before the movement really got big. So I just want to see like, what are people recommending today? And this book came up like hands down, like this is the book you should read that like epitomizes all of it. So if you guys are looking to get into this movement, it sounds like that's a really good book that will kind of give you the whole spectrum of like what it is and how you get started with it.
Nice. All right. And if you are listening to this episode and you're just thinking like, oh my gosh, I don't even know where to start. What is my freedom number? I don't know how to find my freedom number. I don't necessarily want to join the FIRE movement, but I do want financial independence and maybe through entrepreneurship. Come and join us in Lifestyle Builders. This is a lot of what we talk about in there. We have Find Your Freedom course, which talks about budgeting and paying off your debt and finding your freedom number, how you can build the business to support that freedom number. So you can do that at joinlifestylebuilders.com. And we will, of course, include the link in the show notes. All right. It's been another great episode with Tom and Ariana, your hosts and Lifestyle Builders.
And as always, I want you guys to remember that it's your life, your business, your way. We'll see you next time.
Bye. Hey, we hope you enjoyed this episode. If you know another entrepreneur who may benefit from hearing this show, we would so appreciate you being a good friend and sharing it with them. Are you dreaming of a life of financial freedom and more time to spend with your loved ones? Want to build your business to support that dream? You need Lifestyle Builders, a mentorship program designed to meet you where you are and give you strategic and custom guidance so you can build the business you need for the life you crave. Become a Lifestyle Builder at joinlifestylebuilders.com. Are you a Lifestyle Builders podcast fan? We'd love to hear from you. Head on over to tomandariana.com/iTunes and leave us a review.